Ask the Podcast Coach for July 9th, 2022.
Let's get ready to podcast.
There it is. It's that fun-filled music that means, hey, it's Saturday morning. It's time for Ask the Podcast Coach, where you get your podcast questions answered live. I'm Dave Jackson from the School of Podcasting.com, and joining me right over there, look at those guns. Do that again. Oh, look at those guns. The one and only Jim Cullison from theaverageguy.tv. Jim, how's it going, buddy?
Greetings, Dave. Happy Saturday morning to you, and happy National Sugar Cookie Day. Did you know that today is?
I did not know that.
It's always good to have a sugar cookie.
That is one of those things that it's like a Lay's potato chip. You can't eat just one. And
no, there's all kinds of cookie companies now that are making them, and I have no idea how they make them so soft and delicious, but they're just delightful. And you're getting diabetes right there.
That's excellent. If you are new to the show, we are at askthepodcastcoach.com/live. If you're listening on Twitter Spaces, just I think it's a request or raise your hand or something like that. We've got DR on deck. She'll be up in just a second. And how she got here was by going to askthepodcastcoach.com/join. But before we go jumping into, because I believe she has a marketing topic she wants to talk about. Jim, I believe, is a little coffee.
Well,
he's a little coffee.
This would be good.
That's right. It would be. And that, of course, is the lovely coffee pour, and that is brought to you by our good friend Mark over at podcastbranding.co. If you are looking for, let's say a lead magnet. I just saw a thing today where it's like lead magnets are like the best thing since sliced bread and blah, blah, blah. Well, you could get Mark to make you a lead magnet. I use him for artwork. He's made the Podcast Rodeo Show. He's done Ask the Podcast Coach. He's done School of Podcasting. Now, what if you're like, well, what I really need is a website? Well, Mark can do that as well. And what's great about all of those things is he's going to sit down with you one-on-one. He's going to listen to your show. He's going to check out your website, figure out where you want to go, and make sure that your brand is there to get you there. He is a podcaster and an award-winning graphic artist. And of course, he's Canadian. So that means he's going to be polite and fun to work with. And I was trying to remember what I was doing. I was uploading my logo for Podcast Movement. I'm going to be speaking there, and they said send over the logo, and I said, well, I got mine from podcastbranding.co.
Of course, big thanks to our friend Dan Lefebvre over there, based on a true story podcast, the Mug sponsor. He can sponsor the Mug when he's done, but he hasn't been done for a while. And speaking of not being done for a while, he's got a lot of great podcasts available for you, a bunch of episodes. If you need something different, and Dave, who doesn't need something different to listen to from time to time? Don't you kind of get sick of every once in a while, you're like, okay, enough of these podcasts that I listen to. Check out a new one based on a true story podcast.com. Dan, thanks for your sponsorship.
Jim, are you saying that you don't need any more inspiration, or you don't feel empowered?
There's moments I don't. No, I don't need anymore. Just moments, not all the time.
Not all the time.
Don't you get to the point sometimes you're like, enough learning. I don't need any more, right? Just
give me something fun.
Not all the time. Yeah, not all. That's not all the time, but every once in a while I get sick of it.
Well, DR has been patiently waiting for us to come up and ask her questions. So DR,
hi,
thanks for joining us.
Hi, how are you? Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Well, let me just preface this by saying that I am a podcast manager, and my training has been always in the branded podcast. If you have a business and you want a podcast, that's where my training is. So I had an idea of having my own podcast, and in 5 years, it will be my 50th high school reunion. And I thought it would be interesting to go back and interview some of my fellow classmates from Aragon High School, 1977, and find out where their journey has taken them. Did they go into the profession that they dreamed about when they were a senior in high school? What life lessons have they carried with them all these years? who was their favorite teacher, who was their least favorite teacher, things like that.
Mhm.
So now this is a passion project. I don't care for the phrase hobby, but this is a passion project. But on the other hand, I don't want to have to pay out for the host and the website and the blah, blah, blah. I don't want to have to pay for that. I would like to have something support it. So I went to a couple of my, how I phrased them, podcast gurus. And Dave, you are one of them that I went to about this. I also went to Dave Hooper. I also went to Tanner Campbell. God bless him, Tanner Campbell. He really went above and beyond. He called the district that the school was in, found out that there was a grant that the district gives out every single year. And he advised me, DR, call it an art project. Don't call it a podcast. Call it an art project. And he said that he really thinks that I might have a good chance of getting part of this grant. So now I'm going to make it public because that is what most of my gurus have advised me. But now, how do I market this to that general public? My idea was that maybe I would catch the boomer market that liked to reminisce a little bit, because we all have had our formative years, right? That's kind of universal. So how would you market this? Sorry, my question was so long.
I would work with the school, because who is the target audience for this? The class of 1977 from your high school. Right. I'm not going to care about these people, and unless you're a really good storyteller, you're probably not going to suck me in. That'd be like, I'm doing a podcast about the band Autograph. Okay. So some people have heard Turn Up the Radio. Many people have not. Many people so I have to find Autograph fans. So I would try to work with the school, or I'm not sure exactly, but that's Facebook. Definitely get a Facebook. I know my class.
Yeah. They have had a dedicated Facebook page for class of 77 Aragon High School for several years. So I am utilizing that.
Right. So this is a passion project. How will you know if it's successful?
That's a good question.
Or what are you looking for as success in this?
Yeah.
Well, since this is not connected to my business, I kind of planned on doing a mid-roll about Mouthy Broad Media. And if you ever want to do a podcast like this and blah, 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 that kind of thing. So I don't know. I thought maybe contacting some businesses that is right next to Aragon High School, that Aragon people would go to on a regular basis, maybe as a sponsor, maybe some merch with the cover art on it.
So it's not a passion project.
Because I'm spending so much money on it.
No, you're trying to earn money on this. That's now a marketing piece.
Well, I'm trying to not have to pay for the host and not have to pay for the web page and things like that. I'm trying to get that covered.
Yeah. Okay, because
there's lots of ways to do that without having to have sponsorship to get it done.
Okay.
Right. What I'm struggling. I'm not struggling. Yeah, I am struggling. I'm struggling with the hook on this. So like in Dave, we kind of say the target audience, but so it's easy to say, well, okay, the class the class will listen to this. So there's part of it, but what's in it that's interesting for someone who's not in the class? Because Dave's right. I wouldn't listen to it if it's just a bunch of high school blah, 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 unless there's a hook in it. Do you have, is there something interesting, or can you find something interesting through these interviews?
Something universal?
That would be interesting to someone else. I mean, so this is reality TV does this, except they manufacture it. And then the hook is the shenanigans that go on inside of the reality TV. None of it's actually real, but the hook is the obnoxious stuff that goes on inside of whatever the show is. If you're just going to interview people, there's not a large hook there unless you're really creative with the interview, right?
Right.
The other thing is, since it's 5 years away, you've got some opportunity to make the podcast part of the reunion. So you could, like, this all could be leading up to the reunion. This may be something interesting. Everybody likes relationships, so you could go back and talk about past relationships or relationships that didn't work out, and it didn't work out then, but it's, that kind of stuff.
That's
Or
good.
love, that's controversy, right?
If you ever got a detention or we called them pink cards, that was like, the detention on steroids.
Troublemakers.
Yeah, like, what was your favorite memory? Because part of this is going to be like, oh, I totally forgot that we used to do that. So that's going to be kind of the fun thing. But whoever your class president is, who's in charge of the reunion, that Jim's got a great point, because they want people at the reunion. So this will kind of like start to build that fear of missing out kind of thing.
One of the things that I have started on the Facebook page was, hey, what exactly was our senior prank and who was behind it? Right. So there is a kind of this thread of, I don't know, but I think so-and-so knows. Right. And he said, I don't know, but you know what? So-and-so knows. So I've got this kind of web going on.
You could tell the story, the senior prank story, make it more storytelling than interviewing type deal for one of the episodes, right? That could
I kind of wanted to keep it going from episode to episode. Do you know anything about it? No, but I think so-and-so knows about it. Then I'll interview him, and then they'll keep passing the
that's a storytelling technique, right? To kind of get bits and pieces to you.
Because
then it's leading up the hook, as it's leading up to a conclusion of, oh, this is what it was. You could also have, and I'll use this term lightly, but you could also have people come to tell dirt on other people in the class, right? And where you want to be kind and careful about that, right? But it could be one of those things where you bring people in to tell story and then let that other person come on the next time and tell it. Again, that hook is dangerously close to the class. So like I wouldn't expect gigantic numbers, but if the story is told right, in a universal way where people find, Dave always says, makes you laugh, cry. What are the other ones, Dave?
Laugh, cry, think, groan, educate, or entertain.
Yeah. And so that laugh and entertain bit, maybe but you got to work hard at that, right? That's not just going to happen. You're going to have to kind of manufacture it in some ways. Like I said, reality TV does it with fakery. If you don't want to go that route, you'll have to really dig deep to get some interesting things out of it.
Yeah. I know, if there are people you can't find, that, like, for us, and he finally surfaced on Facebook. I mean, I've been out of high school for 30 some years now at this point, and we're all like, whatever happened to Jimmy Haben? Because Jimmy Haben was nuts. He was hilarious and had a great voice, but like, he ran down the hallway once in his underwear. So he was always crazy. I remember he took a fire extinguisher and hosed down the curtains and he was always just doing stuff, just,
that's where the yearbook, comes in handy, because there was, the class clown and the most likely to succeed and the this and the that. So that's probably a good resource.
But I would start with because in my case, the lovely Rella Rotundo she's in charge of really a few people that help do the reunions. And the one thing that person,
is her name again?
Well, that's Rella Rotundo, but I mean, you need a Rella, whoever your Rella is.
That's unfortunate.
But and she's a nutritionist, which is great, because she's not rotund at all. But anyway, find out who your organizer is. And the one thing they're going to tell you, it's not easy. At least in my case, it's hard to find because people move and they just ghosted like the organizer. So that person should be able to point you to the people that they know where they are. Because that's the other thing. You're going to need people. Almost like a
true crime, Dave, like you're saying, like you would treat it like the true crime podcasts do, where you're doing some investigation work, and then you kind of want to leave people out there, leave that kind of hanging. To bring people back. That may have some universal appeal.
Yeah. So it's the other thing you have to keep in mind is, what if they're not exactly proud of where they ended up? That could be the problem with some people, when they're like, and insert. I'm not going to say any jobs because they're like, well, I'm a
right.
that's my job. What are you talking about? So,
and I think the compelling element will have a lot to do with how that pre-interview goes, my questions to them, how I can relate to them. And I mean, I think that's what's going to make me decide whether or not this story is compelling enough to put on.
Yeah. Are there any teachers still alive?
I have contacted 2, and neither one of them want to have anything to do with it.
Okay. Tell me, give me your pitch. Let's hear your pitch.
Okay. I said, hi, in Mr. Fisher's case. Hi, Mr. Fisher. I was never in one of your classes at Aragon. However, my sister Joy was, and you happen to be one of her favorite teachers. I am a podcaster living in Nashville, Tennessee, and I am planning to do a podcast all about the class of 1977. I would love it if you could come on and talk about those days. That's basically what I said.
Yeah, that's not bad. Listen, they're older, and I just most of them are probably like, that's just too messy, too much to think about. They're not. That's a generation that didn't grow up with podcasting or those kinds of things. They think it's going to be an investigative, they did grow up with 2020 where someone died when they were asking questions like this, right?
And someone was blamed for something.
Exactly. So there may be some hesitation in it with that. I mean, I think if they said no, that's fine. There's probably other. You could go with family members too of like, when I went to school, I mean, my older brother was ahead of me. My younger brother was behind me. We all intersected in some ways too. So it doesn't have to just be limited. And this may be the way you expand the circle out a little bit. The class of 77 had a bigger impact than just I don't know how many people were in the class. Do you know
about 300 and some?
Well, it's a good size. So that's even better. So yeah, their impact from the 3 years ahead and the 3 years behind, you might even have some stories or some features, some folks from those years too.
I also wanted to do maybe a couple shows interspersed in the season having to do with the classmates that are no longer with us.
Correct. Yeah. Oh no, that's a good
for like a reminisce thing.
Yeah. Dedication type deal.
I did an episode of Building a Better Dave where I don't know why, but at my reunions, they start off the reunion right before dinner is served by reading the names. And so the last time, because the list is getting long at this point. And I'm sitting, and of course you sit with all the friends that you always sat with, and we get done, and I looked at my best friend, I go, hey, congratulations on not making the list. I was like, it's the
last reunion that I went to. I looked at my sister and I said, I don't recognize a single person in this room. Did we really go to this high school? I don't understand why I don't recognize anyone.
I didn't recognize. I'm standing literally like 2 feet, like right in front of my prom date. And she says, are you not going to say hi, Dave? And I turned around and I was like, and there's like it seemed like a long time. It was probably half a second where I'm like going, who is this person?
Exactly.
And all of a sudden, and she goes, you took me to prom. And I was like, oh my God, Kelly, how are you? Like, Tom is saying you could ask the question, what's the one thing you've learned over the years that we can all benefit from? All that kind of stuff would be.
I was going to do like a tag thing. If you could tag anyone who could do the interview, who would you tag? Give me 3 people. And the other thing I was going to do before, I'm going to send out the questions beforehand, before the even pre-interview. So I wanted them to give me 3 to 5 trigger words or trigger phrases that would conjure up some stories, a good compelling story. And it would be planned as to which one of these I'm going to choose. But I would say on the show, give me your 3 trigger words, and they would give me 3. And I'd say, hey, let's do number 2. And it's going to be planned beforehand that we're going to do that. But that would lead into a good story.
Yeah. I like the idea. For me, it just sounds like a lot of work. I think you're going to end up doing a lot of investigating to find people. You're going to have to.
The fact that we have the Facebook group is very helpful.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah, that's true.
that's very helpful.
Yeah.
There's already been several people from there that have said, "Oh, I'd love to come on," and I'm like, "Well, let's see."
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
be
the
wary
other,
of the ones that want to come on.
Yeah, exactly.
yeah. And did you go to high school is this around Nashville or is this somewhere else in the
Oh
country?
no, this is California, San Mateo,
Oh
California.
boy.
Bay
Okay, so
Area.
so now we've got the joy because it's my
Remote.
brother graduated in 77. So I'm trying to picture this where I now have to coach my brother into doing some sort of either Zoom. I guess most people know Zoom, right?
Everybody knows Zoom. Yeah.
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 So
Although I'm going to be using StreamYard. Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. Yeah. No,
DR, I think I would try a bunch of things early, see what kind of, don't commit to any long-term thing. Try some stuff and see if it picks up some traction. Experiment with some stuff. Do
Right.
some one-offs just to kind of see what you get traction on.
Yeah.
And then reform your plan and like, okay, this works. We're going to go this direction.
Right. In order to get this, go ahead.
Well, and the other thing you mentioned that you could put in a mid-roll or something about this. This will get the word out that, oh, by the way, I do podcasts because I keep trying to do a local show, and the police department in my city reached out and said, "Hey, we're hiring. Would you like to know what it's like to be a cop?" And I'm like, "Sure." So I went downtown and interviewed them in their station. And just in that little process, and then I've been sharing it out on Twitter to the mayor's office and this and that. And that hasn't resulted in anybody hiring me yet. But I've had somebody call me. They're like, "We're thinking of doing this." And I'm like, "I'm right in your backyard." So I have a fish on the line. So it's all. And
it's funny that you would say about the local thing, because about a year ago, I did a full presentation for the Bellevue Chamber of Commerce. I live in a little town called Bellevue. Yes, it's named after the crazy hospital in New York, called Bellevue Chamber of Commerce. And I thought this would be a great marketing thing to say the events that are happening around Bellevue, new restaurants that are closing, restaurants that are moving, little one-person run new businesses that the pandemic has all of a sudden, created. So I thought this would be great. Well, I didn't know at the time, they knew that they were kind of in an upheaval of who's going to take that president spot, that seat. And of course, the pandemic kind of canceled out 2 years in a row the big profit-making thing that they put on. So they didn't go for it, but I'm going to revisit that idea.
Yeah, I've tried 3 times to do my local show. The first 2 times, every time I went to do it, COVID would come back and shut everything down. And then when I tried it the third time, COVID shut me down. And now I live in Akron, Ohio, which is now making the national news. And now everything's getting shut down again because we're under curfew. And I was like, okay, this is fun. So, but I think it's a great idea. I hear it and go, how many other podcasts do you have? That's a good question.
Right now, I don't have any. I did have one called
that's the good answer.
Side Hustle Lounge. Okay.
Because I just think it's going to be a time suck. So
yeah,
it could be.
But I had one called Boomer's Side Hustle Lounge that was another labor of love, and that I basically did I thought it was going to make me a better podcast manager, and it did. So
okay,
good.
And I have one more question.
Okay,
what is wrong with the word hobby?
It denotes I don't know. It just doesn't feel as though it means as much, that you're not trying as hard. I don't know. Do you know what I mean, Jim?
No, I understand what you're saying. You're just the way you approach that. We all approach words.
Yeah, that's it. That's why I asked. I was like,
hobby doesn't. For others, like no, that's a perfect word for me. It's something that I do to have fun with, and I mean, certainly hobbies can make money. So, so
yeah,
all good.
Yeah.
All good.
Kim says to her, it doesn't sound as professional.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I think it just depends on how you approach it. I think it takes. By the way, I think the word takes some pressure off at times. It's my hobby.
True.
You know, this is what I do for fun. And so I think it also means you can quit whenever you want. Right?
True.
That's what I
True.
think that means. That's what I think that
Double-edged
means
sword.
too. Like,
You quit
But yeah,
golfing? What? Yeah.
yeah. I was a
And then-
skier for a lot of years, and we had some family injuries, and it got really expensive, and that's a hobby I don't do anymore. You know, you're just like, it's just too expensive. I can quit when I want. I don't get, you know, I wasn't a professional. Didn't do it to get paid. So
Right.
Yeah.
good.
But in the meantime, I still got, you know, Mouthy Broad Media going, and I'm happy with that, and we're doing it. So,
Good.
There you
Good.
go.
Was this helpful?
Pardon me?
DR, was this helpful? Was this helpful?
It was very
to-
helpful. I
Good.
got a lot of ideas that are written down, and I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for jumping in. Good to see
Yeah.
you. Thanks for doing
Thank
it.
you.
Appreciate it.
We'll
Bet.
see you. Yes, Ken is asking me, is that a do? It's the baby can. I'm trying to wean myself off.
No,
But
I
yeah,
need more. It's
I-
one of
I
those
fell
mornings.
off-
I need more coffee too. Can you help me out there?
I fell off the wagon. And of course, that coffee pour is brought to you by, if I can do this, there we go.
There you go.
And we'll, our awesome supporters. You can find them at askthepodcastcoach.com/support. And one of those is James from the Dog Podcast Network. If you got a little doggy or a big doggy or a middle doggy, and you want to walk around the block or chill out in the car with your four-legged friend while you're driving him to the vet and they're freaking out. Do you have any dogs, Jim?
I do not. I'm not allowed.
My dog knew when we were going to the vet, and he would freak.
Yeah.
I don't know how he knew
They
it.
sense it. They sense
Yeah, it was like, dude, it's okay. Check him out, Dog Podcast Network. If Ask the Podcast Coach is running on Podpage. If you want to try Podpage, well, then just go over to trypodpage.com. You can try it for free. You can I made a website yesterday in 7 minutes. It was so much fun. If you need more Jim Cullison, then go over to theaverageguy.tv and check out Home Gadget Geeks. And if you're thinking of starting a podcast, well, when you think podcasting, think School of Podcasting. And again, if you'd like to be an awesome supporter, because we give you a giant shout out when you join, we have special music and all that fun stuff. Go over again to askthepodcastcoach.com/support. So
I love that background music. I don't like. I know we've done some different things, but keep that. That is good.
that's it. We'll just do it for the whole show now. We'll just be all like, all right, next up we've got So
I knew some radio guys. I knew some rock radio DJs that played music for a while, and then they, their in between talking got more interesting than the music, so they just started talking more. But they wanted to play the music, so they did play the music behind their talking. Very, very, very faint. You could just barely hear it, and I think they did that for about a year. And then they just quit. One day they just went full talk. So there's like how things transition. Eventually they went full talk, and then they went nationwide. Like they became a syndicated show. They got picked up by other stations. The point in that sometimes, as we think about what we're talking about with DR, you get started, especially like that, and you don't know exactly where you're going. Try some things out early.
Yeah.
Forgive yourself for things that go wrong in those early ones. Don't get discouraged if you have one that just blows up in your face or it's just terrible. But eventually I think you'll find a rhythm in there and stuff that works. But you won't know until you try.
Yeah, because I'm thinking of the people that I went to high school with, and I know one is a librarian, one works in a high school, like she's the lunch lady. One guy was a paramedic and a fireman for a while, and now he's doing something else. So that's the thing. Like you're going to find people that are not, oh, I cured cancer and I invented sliced bread. It's, I have 3 kids and I'm the lunch lady. And there's nothing wrong with that. She's happy and she loves it. She loves to cook, and, she's doing what she loves. So that could be but the cool thing, the thing that's going to suck that in is the relationships. Like I want to know that, Dawn Harrison is still singing. Like when I hear that Dawn Harrison has been in all these plays and she's in New York and all that, I'm like, oh, that's cool, because she was a great singer. I want to know that Greg Hurd is doing something with his art talent. So that's going to be the fun thing. But again, like Jim doesn't care about Greg Hurd. He doesn't know Greg Hurd. So that's what's going to be the fun part about that. So
if I cared, and I'm going to say this, and it's going to sound terrible.
A little harsh.
Don't,
Oh.
So don't DR. So don't hate me for this. But if I and now I forgot the way I was going to say it after saying it that way. If I was also like DR, right? I follow DR as an interviewer or as a podcaster. There could also be a hook in that where if you had an existing audience, Dave, in your case, you've got an existing audience of, listeners for this show and School of Podcasting. You've done this before. You could say, hey, I'm starting a new podcast and we're going to do this. Come and listen. So that's also, a potential audience to bring over is if you're kind of already kind of known, you might be able to pull some folks over that way too.
Yeah, I would definitely read the book Storyworthy, because that is a great book on how to tell a story. So that way you might be able, because remember, you can do some creative editing here. I remember once I interviewed Monica Rivera, who's a friend of mine. And at like the 20-minute mark, she starts dropping these awesome, like, holy cow things. And I moved that right to the front of the interview. Yeah. And it was like, I'm not going to make my audience wait 20 minutes for this. So it'll be fun. We want updates occasionally. So we'll see how it goes. Speaking of local podcasts, I am trying something new. And if you want to see it, it's today's episode is how to protest and not go to jail. Why? Because it's the Akron podcast at akronpodcast.com. But what I'm doing is, the reason I started this show, amongst other things, because I really don't care that much about Akron, is I wanted to play with Red Circle. So what I'm doing is I have a dynamic piece in there that's the calendar. And if you go to akronpodcast.com/events, you'll see an account. Now, here's the thing. I'm paying $8 a month. So $8 a month, and I'm not going to make that back for a while. But I found this calendar that I like, and it makes a pretty decent looking calendar. And tomorrow, Kevin Hart is playing at the big where the Cavs play, the basketball team. So how I'm going to try to monetize this is we're going to have this calendar in the middle of it, and if anybody buys tickets off my website, it will be it's an affiliate thing through Share a Sale, Ticket Nation or something like that. And it looks good because I was like, I don't know, most people know Ticketmaster. Would somebody buy tickets from Ticket Nation? And I was like, I guess we'll find out. Plus, at this point, there's no audience for this thing. It's maybe 20 downloads an episode. So I was like, we'll see. But I'm trying it. That's the whole thing. I'm going to try it. I'm going to see what happens. Every time I try to do fun, happy content, somebody gets shot. I mean, literally, there are a lot of people getting shot in Akron, Ohio. So if you could all just put your guns down. A 4-year-old girl got shot yesterday somehow. I don't know. But it's just depressing. And that's the whole point. I don't want to do depressing news, but I'm going to try it. That's, I guess, where I was going. Yeah. I'm going to try this, see what happens. It's going to cost me $8 a month. All right. Well, I'll drink one less, Starbucks, and I'll be good. So Ross had a question about Descript. He said, I got to use Descript for the first time. There we go. And the studio sound feature is amazing. Do you think it's better than Auphonic? And the answer is absolutely. I mean, like, wow. Like today, there wasn't a huge difference, and you both sound great, but DR and Jim are on the same channel. They're on my USB channel. And I thought I might run that through Studio Sound to get you leveled out. And again, DR's into a microphone and things like that. So let me show you real quick. I'll share my screen because I don't use Descript for the transcriptions and things like that. If you want to check this out, it is supportthisShow.com/Descript. That's my affiliate link. But it's what's weird is it's not super easy to find because it's kind of a, oh, by the way, this we have this thing too. So if you open up your Descript and you have your file. So in this case, this is a very short file of the guy from King's X that says, hey, if you like what you hear, go tell someone. And you have project files. So project files in this case is one, I think, MP3 file. Yeah. So Doug's King's D it's a WAV file. So when I click on that, way over here on the right-hand side, you have a link that says turn on studio sound, and then you'll see an intensity option. And what I do with the intensity is, well, here, I don't think you guys can hear this because we got the whole mix minus thing going on. No, you guys can't hear that, right? Yeah, so hence the mix minus. But anyway, what's cool about it is you can turn it on and off. So you can hear it with and without. And then I usually, because 100%, just like it is in Audacity, is going to go too far and you're going to sound like you're underwater. So I usually listen for what the noise is, and then I just turn it down until the noise goes away. And it's amazing. I think I forget how many hours a month I have Descript for, but I have people that I edit a show for a bunch of doctors that do brain surgery, and they're absolutely like they're brain surgeons, but they're recording in, I don't know where, but it's either into their phone. One guy was literally, I swear, standing directly in front of his air conditioning, and this took all that stuff out, and it's cut my editing time in half, because I used to go into RX9 or whatever isotope is, and I do noise removal, I'd go deplosive, I'd go audio isolate, or it's pretty close to a miracle thing. Ross says I pulled it back to 75% because he watched Dave's video. Yeah, I put a video, I was talking about this on another show, and I made that's for Shep's Omni channel. I had a quick video for that, but it's pretty cool. So yes, I think it's better than, and not that Alphonic is bad. And this is something that I'm noticing, because I talked about the Rodecaster 2, is just because you talk about the new thing doesn't mean the old thing is now bad. Because somebody asked me, like, well, should I not buy, I have a Rodecaster 1, should I get a Rodecaster 2? And I go, the Rodecaster 1's a great piece of equipment. Don't go too crazy on thinking it's awful now because there's a new one. So, and then the chat room's having their own show today, which is fun. Dave says, what about Podpage that Dave talked about? See, there's the problem. That's paid. It's $15 a month. So to me, again, if the Akron podcast cost me, well, nothing for actually, I take that back. I've ended up paying for Red Circle hosting because I have a couple of shows I'm testing on that, and then whatever, $20 for Alphonic. So, and 28 if we count the calendar. And that's where I go when I do a hobby. I spend hundreds of dollars every year on my bike. When I bowled, it was $20 a week to bowl. It's like those things cost money. So, and yeah, DR says there is a huge thing coming to Descript. I just saw that when I logged in. They didn't say what it was, but I can save my seat to hear the big announcement. So, Uncle Marv says I still use Alphonic even with the Rodecaster Pro because sometimes my remote guest levels are still off. Yep, I use it. The only problem I've ever run into with Alphonic is if you have a heavy breather and they're just a person that, every now and then kind of, and what will happen is Alphonic will see that as words. It doesn't know that it's words versus breath. It just sees it as, wow, that's a fairly loud audio signal. And Alphonic's job is to make all the audio levels the same. So all of a sudden everybody turns into Darth Vader when they're, you're like, what the heck? So that's, but Alphonic was better than, the Levelator, right? There was the Levelator was the first one, and that there was no noise removal. And then we had Alphonic, which does kind of remove hiss, which is good. And now there's this other thing. So let's see. Coach Dave has a question. He says, you have created a friendly lounge atmosphere. We in the chat room come to see you and to chat. It's part of the show's value. Oh, he's, I guess, saying why I'm saying the chat room is going fun. Yeah, that's always fun. Let's see. Jim, anything you want to talk anything about what we talked about before we hit record? Because you're trying to find guests for your show. Because you lost your.
Yeah, this has been an interesting experiment. I lost Mike Uyghur, who had been the co-host for a long time on Home Gadget Geeks. And what do you do when, he was because of the relationship I had with him, he was an easy go-to and we didn't have a guest. And so he'd like, hey, do we have a guest tonight? Nope. Okay, it's you and me. All right, here's the 4 things I want to talk about. And so it was just super simple. When he departed, I struggled for a couple months, canceled a whole bunch of shows. Was like, and have begun to invite, have gone through like the podcast guests, those kinds of directories to invite these guests. And I think what I'm finding, Dave, and this is just for me, I create Home Gadget Geeks as a community podcast. So a lot of the guest hosts that come on, Uncle Marv, who's in the chat room, he's one of them, they're just normal guys and gals like you and me. They're not, they haven't necessarily, I interviewed on Thursday, a guy who had, was an early employee at Amazon, had done some big stuff at Amazon, who had founded 3 different companies and now is doing his 4th and it's being very successful with it. It's a harder interview for me. Like Ross was out there. Ross, who's in the chat right now, he came and joined us on Thursday night. Enjoyed good conversation, but as a host, Dave, I struggled with it a little bit more than I would when it's just hanging out with friends, right? Type deal. So I've got the conversation you and I had around that was kind of like, do I want to do more of those or do I want to do less of those? I'm comfortable with it, but I'm not comfortable with it. So I think sometimes I'm in this phase even where I'm still questioning the sweet spot of what I want from a show. Like, where do I want to go with this? What do I want to do? What do I want the outcomes to be? And I know we're always chasing influencers, on this. And I really resist that. I really just want a fun conversation. Okay, not that Thursday's night's conversation wasn't fun. It just wasn't as comfortable for me as it normally is in a lot of cases. So just kind of thinking through as I'm talking to you, the podcaster, just, either encouraging or getting you to think about, what's the why and why are you doing it? And are you in your sweet spot? I think Thursday night was okay. I don't think I was as in my sweet spot as I think if you go back and listen to it, you'd be like, Jim, you're crazy. It's fine.
Do you mean your zone of genius?
My zone of no, I haven't heard zone of genius.
Oh yeah. You need to be in your zone of genius.
Yeah.
And I was like, ooh, zone of genius. Since you said a fun word that I have to point this out. I got an email this week about scrunch.com. And the thing I love about it is, Jim, I think this might be my next thing. It's a place where it's awards technology. It's a community for influencers. And what I loved about it is for $10 a month, you can sign up and buy your own, buy my own information, because also it'll get you access to the Scrunch Awards. So this is where, creators are going to vote other creators and which one's the best, overall category. And there's some prizes along with this. Where's the one? I had a page here and maybe nope, that's not it. But it's, I know they have they have a show, and this is where I can't find it, but they're all like, one of these pages has really pretty people on it. But for $10 a month, Jim, you could be a certified influencer. And I was like, well, for $10, that's money well spent, because I want to be an influencer.
Wow.
And I thought it was interesting that they picked the word scrunch. And so, yeah, 3 master classes. The virtual awards are, yeah.
Certified influencer, really? I mean, can we pay for another thing to be,
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, I went to their tech section, and this is where they have a database where you can find other influencers to reach out and influence each other or something. Yeah. So for me, I was like, I guess if I was trying to find podcast guests or something like this, but yeah, there it is. You'll see there's Scrunch University here on the left-hand side. And so I'm tempted to spend $10 just to see exactly what this is. My favorite thing, the reason I'm being somewhat snarky about this, is years ago and it's at scrunch.com. Years ago, Adam Curry you know, you have a question that you ask everybody in your audience. And Adam's was, are you a folder or a scruncher? And what he was referring to is, how do you wipe your butt? Do you fold the paper towel or the toilet paper and it's a flat fold, or do you just scrunch it up and wipe away? So when I heard scrunch.com, I giggled. I was like, huh. And then when I saw I could, for $10, be a certified influencer, I thought that was.
I think influencing is earned. Not,
yeah, that's it. I'm like, I'm pretty sure I can't buy that. That's called American Idol, and it doesn't seem to work.
Yeah, I don't. Well, I've used that term influencer, and I use it in the context for what I do for Gallup, because that's what I do there. But it's you got to earn it. I mean, I've done 8 or 9 years of podcast, nine this month now. 9 years of podcasting for them, and I feel like the 3,000 episodes that I've made while I've been over there, not all of them good, by the way, earns me the right to say I'm an influencer in that space. Not because I say so, but because others do, right? I think that's so.
Yeah.
I just get Ross had jumped in. He asked me this question: did you invite the guest on because talking about the guest I had on Thursday? Did you invite the guest on because you wanted to talk about the topic, or you talked about the topic because you had a big ticket guest? So this was one where a podcast guest host company reached out to me and said, "Hey, we were doing a little research. Looks like, you know, you get thousands of these emails. Looks like we have a guest that might match." And I said, "Oh, really? Send me a link." And so they'd set up this page for him. And I was like, "You're absolutely right. It does look like a good fit." And it actually was a really, really good fit to the show. I was just it's good content. It'll be out here shortly, this afternoon sometime. It's really good content. He was a really, really good guest. The point was not the quality of the guest. The point was I wasn't as comfortable with it because I just didn't have the relationship that I normally have.
I think that's it. You're missing the relationship where it's kind of like speed dating. You're like, well, Match.com says we should like each other, and you're kind of like trying to figure it out, and you don't have that kind of familiar
rapport, right? Rapport. Listen, you and I, Dave, been doing this a long time. We know each other. I know your facial expressions. I know when you're annoyed with me. I know when I need to keep going. I know those things, right? And it makes the act of podcasting more comfortable. Again, not that that's always the goal. Like sometimes I've got to interview people I don't know. It's just less comfortable for me. It was one of those realizations. I hadn't had a guest I didn't know in a while. And I was just like, oh, yeah.
Well, I have a question. How do you feel when somebody at the end of the interview is like, hey, thanks, Jim. Do you know when this is going to be out and blah, blah, blah. And you go, or then they go, let's see, who does this? You would then go to that person and say, hey, do you know anybody else that would be a good guest for this show? What's your thoughts on that? Because I've had people do that to me, and I was like, I wonder how, because it sounds like a great idea.
No, I'm for it. I think it's I think it's, especially if the interview's gone really well. If you've
bingo.
You made this connection, you had a good interview, you're like, hey, is there anybody else? I just did this for the Gallup podcast on Thursday. I think I was doing an interview, and the guest mentioned someone who was in chat, and I was like, oh, I haven't interviewed that person yet. Maybe based on the things she said, maybe I should interview her. So at the end of the program, after we were off recording, I said, hey, should I interview so-and-so? And she was like, absolutely. Now that's a version of that, right? That's not exactly like that. But no, I think if your business is guests like that, you got anybody else that's like you? Hey, you were really great. Do you know anybody like you? Or, Dave, I always say, hey, can I invite you back in a couple months, maybe 6 months from now? Would that be okay if I asked? And I've never had anybody go, no, not really that interested. They always go, yeah, sure. Well, I mean, if you've had them once, the second time is a million times better. So,
yeah, I think the key to that you said is, especially if it went really good, because I've had interviews where I've been on somebody's show and the whole time I'm like, why am I here? What? It's like, I am not a good fit for the show. Shame on me for not doing my homework, but I was like, And then they'll go, do you know of anybody else that, and I'm like, I'm not sending anybody over here. This is like, you asked me to come talk about podcasting, and we didn't talk about podcasting. And they're like, so that's why I asked. I was like, because there are times when I'm like, and I think in that case I said, if you'd like, I can do a introduction via email. And then I basically told the person ahead of time, hey, I was on the show. Here's what happened if you're interested. And so I give them that one first, like, hey, you're going to see a warm introduction from me. This was not the best experience for me, just so you know. Yeah. Really nice person, blah, blah, blah. But they asked me to talk about this. We ended up talking about this. And then I'll do the warm introduction and say, hey, meet so-and-so, blah, blah, blah. So hasn't happened a lot. Maybe I'm triggered.
I've also, you have folks reach out to you wanting to interview you. You know, you alluded to this just a second ago. And I put a few speed bumps in there, and I actually, for most, I'll say, not sure I'm a really good fit for your show. Tell me how I am. And that just, then they have to think through, they're not just signing up guests, right? They've got to then give me some like, well, I think because I heard you say, or because of this, or because of that. And then I might even come back and say, yeah, that's not really true, or this isn't really accurate, or some of those kinds of things, just to kind of work through that. I actually had an interview. I did it, I don't know, 3 or 4 weeks ago. And we actually argued a little bit back and forth about why I wasn't. I was like, I'm not a good fit. He's like, no, you are. And here's why. And he fought for it.
You are coming on my show, man.
At the end, I'm like, I had to honor it. I was like, dude, you fought for this thing. I'm coming on just because you put the effort in. We had a really good interview because we had worked through a lot of the that kind of became the pre-call, the pre-interviews thing that you kind of work through. You know, if you haven't had some quick conversation with the host that you're going to interview on. Listen, I've done a few of those and they've been a little bit of a disaster. So I wasn't ready. Like I didn't go in ready. So I like to create a little bit of a speed bump in there, go in both directions.
Yeah. Coach Dave says one way if you're looking for, again, guests, he said, when I was buying commercial real estate, I used the triangulation technique. He said, I'd ask around, I'd look for some name to pop up 3 times from different sources. And that was kind of his thing. Someone in Facebook said, hey, I think you guys suggested joining IMDb to book celebrity guests. I have not done this, but I've heard of people. I think it's $20 to be IMDb Pro. And what you want to do before you do that, in the same way that you don't order your media host until you have media to host, don't buy IMDb Pro until you've made a list of all the celebrities that you want information on. Because otherwise you're going to end up having it for more than 1 month. And if you're trying to save money. So yeah, you can use IMDb Pro, go in and get their manager's name and blah, blah, blah. I've never done it because I don't interview celebrities, but I've heard that as a decent resource if you're trying to get a hold of, Tom Hanks or whoever, Mickey Minaj or insert your celebrity here kind of thing. That would be something to do that. And then I wanted to go back to DR's podcast because I forget who had asked her this. David had asked her, what's the name of the podcast? And she said, The Alumni Show. And I would say, because if I'm looking for the class of 83, I'm going to type in Ellet High School class of 83. I would be tempted to name the podcast Ellet High School class of 83 or whatever 96, so that it comes up when people search. And that's exactly who you're trying to get. So the Alumni Show, don't know what it's about.
You could, though. You could call it the Alumni Show dash.
Show colon. Yeah, there we go.
Then put the school in. The other thing, DR, that gives you, not saying you're going to do this, but if you do it that way, the Alumni Show dash colon, whatever you want to do, and then the name of the high school. If another high school, like if you do this well enough, and maybe another high school comes to you and says, hey, we're having a reunion. We want you to do this for us. We will pay you. That's the key part. We will pay you this to make this a part of make it a reunion package. That's maybe something to think about in this. It's like, if you were to learn from this one, how could you structure it in a way you could sell this as a reunion package? because there's 10,000 high school reunions every summer here in the United States, right? We just 35 was last year for us, so we're coming up on 40 in 4 years. We're in that same
That's
same
me.
boat, right? Well, if you had a reunion package and you could pitch that to, because listen, at our age, we don't want to pay for this. We have money. We don't want to do the work. This could be one of those things that brings people together, right? Or becomes part of the reunion.
Yeah, and she's already beat us to the punch.
There
She said the subtitle is Oregon Class of 77.
Subtitle mean?
Subtitle is
it's not in the title. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, I'm going to say if you mean subtitle, no. But if you mean colon, yeah. The subtitle doesn't show up anywhere that I know of. So keep that in mind. Going back to
doesn't show up in most places. I'm sure it shows up in one
someplace,
weird place. Yeah,
right.
But no, if it's not in the title, it doesn't count. You've got to.
Apple's not searching it. That's the bottom line. Is Ken Blanchard says IMDb often gets you the agent, so you're not getting Mickey Minaj, but you might get her
right
agent.
On Twitter. You might get right to him on Twitter.
Troy Heinrichs ended up being like friends with the producer of The Blacklist because he reached out to one of the writers on Twitter. So you never know. And Coach Dave, I don't know how, but this is something too. He says special characters in the title don't always parse properly. Here's one that I go, I don't know what, if I, Jim, if you looked for, I don't know, Starsky and Hutch, how would you type the word and?
A-N-D.
Yeah, thank you. That, in my opinion, is the correct answer. And I see so many people put the ampersand thing, and that does not always go well in different apps. I'm like, no, type what your audience is going to type. It's like, oh, but it's 2 less characters. I'm like, yeah, it's and. So yeah, she's got it right. The colon. So yeah, there you go. And there you go.
That is the truth, by the way, about special characters in the title. Not all ampersand, the actual symbol, translates to a set of characters for some, depending upon the ASCII method that they're using when they're parsing that, it may not show up correctly. So you need to be very, very careful about, and you want to check it, make sure you're use as little punctuation as possible in your title.
Great minds think alike. I was just sitting there thinking, like, what was that website that used to like advertise all the time? It was Classmates. Kyle Bondo says the reunion podcast niche advertising would pair well. So reach out to Classmates and go, hey, I'm willing to, if you give me the people, I'll try to reach out to them and create a podcast for, and then you could make this as like your niche podcast. Mm-hmm. Like I'm the alumni podcast person. And then, because that time after a while, it's when you work with any space, you kind of like, oh, and who's your reunion coordinator? Who's the blah, 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 that whole 9 yards. So
you could even make this a private podcast that becomes part of the reunion package. Now I know you wanted it, DR, I know you wanted it to be public, and that's fine if you want to do it that way. Just saying there's other ways to skin a cat, right? In this case. And so you might want to, I don't know why we use that phrase. That's an awful phrase. Why do we
There was another one I did the other day, something about a dog, and I was like, man, that's weird.
That's terrible.
Yeah.
What? I got to change that. So it's just another way.
And yeah, the thing about a private podcast is, like you said, it's a speed bump to get the content. I mean, there are places
no true. Yes.
There's, because there's Supercast, there's Glow.fm, there's Patreon especially makes it really hard to listen in an app unless you want to listen in the Patreon app. So that's the only kind of downside of a private thing. But like you said, if you somehow make it as, hey, if you buy your ticket today, order it today and get the alumni podcast for free kind of thing, that might be and it also depends on, like, Class of 77. My brother still kind of almost listens to my podcast. He knows I'm a podcast guy, but if it's not on YouTube, he's not watching it. So, and then Coach Dave says, I have a good body of content to share before opening those discussions. It separates actual producers from tire kickers. Yeah. So it's anytime you can have information That's the other thing too. Because she had what, 5 years, you have a chance to take an interview and figure out how can I shape this to make it entertaining. And
5 years is a long time.
It is.
Like, that's a really long time. Lots can change. So yeah, Coach Dave, you caught me. I was pouring some coffee and it spilled on my, and I was like, I need to have, I didn't ruin anything, thank goodness, but I need to keep some paper towels close by here.
I think so. You've lost 2 mixers. One of the things.
The coffee thing fell off.
I need to replace.
Hold this, when I'm pouring it, hold this, and
I need to replace this with like some sort of, whoosh, like cannonball into the thing.
I was trying to be discreet about it, and I was trying not to look as I was pouring, and the lid came off. So now I'm gonna have to wash my. Fortunately, I have a very absorbent keyboard cover thing, desk cover mat kind of thing, and it'll just absorb it, and it's neoprene. I'll just throw it in the wash when we're done.
Since we're kind of talking about getting guests and things of this nature, this was something I got from a Facebook group, and this is one of those don't do that. This person said, "Hi group, I have a podcast I do on Fridays. I'm looking for a guest. Would anyone like to come on?" So when I see that, I'm like, it would be good to say, I have a podcast called blank where we talk about such and such. Would anyone like to come on? So that's one of those things where I know I mentioned last week about how to contact your support people, but I don't know that we're, as much as we all kind of go, well, those podcasters, they like to talk. There are a lot of times when I'm like, we actually need more information here. And unless it was a group about like motorcycle riding and you did a podcast about motorcycle riding, I could see that, but I just saw that and I was like, yeah, that's not going to probably work.
You got to kind of wonder. I mean, I'm wondering now what happened. Like, did they get any, did anybody reply back? Did anybody say anything? What did they get? What's that conversation? That'd almost be a good podcast. What kind of conversation happened after somebody put out, a note like that? I always kind of wonder, did they get anything?
The other thing, I was listening to the Buzzcast this morning. The folks over at Buzzsprout have a podcast, and they seem to have fun. They kind of cover news, and they were talking today, and it's one of those things I know where it is. I never hear much about it. And that is Spotify has basically a blog. If you go to podcasters.spotify.com, that's where you go to log in and see how many downloads you have on Spotify, et cetera, et cetera. But they were talking about writing descriptions for your episodes. And it was really interesting because they were basically saying they should be 3 sentences or less. And I was like, interesting. Because they're saying this is what happens. People search for a podcast in Spotify. They view your show page. So that's where your artwork comes in from podcastbranding.co. You read an episode title. I saw somebody yesterday that it was funny because they reached out to me on my School of Podcasting email. But yet they were a Libsyn customer. So it was fun because I wasn't Dave Jackson Libsyn employee. I was Dave Jackson School of Podcasting guy. And when I saw that all of their episode titles were identical, I was like, oh, holy crap, we got to fix that. That's like, it's so fun. So your episode title comes into play. They read the episode description and then they hit play. So they were saying things like, use keywords, keep it short. And this is where I was like, 3 sentences max. And I was like, They also don't. It's funny because they don't mention links because I
agree with that. By the way, I think that's good. I think that's good.
Well, I know it doesn't need to be War and Peace. That's definitely for sure. And then the other thing,
hold on, 2 different audiences. They're actually thinking about the actual person who's in Spotify looking at this description.
Right.
All of our advice, and when I say I'm going to say our
Yeah.
podcast gurus in our bubble, have always been for the longest time. No, you create uh, Todd Cochran says this all the time. You create well-formed posts for Google, right? So
Right.
that it shows them as two totally different audiences. And so Spotify is saying, hey, look, our search algorithm's different, and you don't need a lot of words to make this work in Spotify. Spotify just gave us a clue to their search algorithm right there. 3 sentences is all we need. So Dave, they're coming off title, and they're probably doing a little bit out of the description, right?
That's the thing that I heard that I was like, well, that's different because Apple does not search the description, because in 2005, everybody's description was Pam Anderson naked, Pam Anderson naked, Pam Anderson naked, trying to get their podcast found.
Right.
And so Apple was just like, all right, you animals, that's enough of that. And they quit searching the description because people just spammed it to death. And so when I heard that, I was like, that's interesting. But yeah, and in the chat room's mentioning that, Google Podcast has a max of 1,000 characters. I am not a fan of putting my full show notes in the feed. Number one, it's a feed. It's not a website. And I realize that it'll show up and things like that. But to me, I would much rather have, like you said, give me enough to let me know if I want to listen to this. And then I put links knowing that some podcast apps, hello iTunes, don't make those clickable. And there's really nothing you can do about that. But it's one of those things that I think, like Jim, I'm like, come up with a really good 3-sentence description, and that will hopefully get people hooked in.
Mm-hmm.
So
the first 3 sentences need to be the best sentences that you have for anything, for anybody reading that. You're not going to get them. You're not certainly in this. I was making this mistake for the longest time. My description started with the same sentence every time. Like on this episode, Mike and Jim talk to. Okay, well, in some cases, in some podcast players, it would only take the first part of the sentence. In this episode, Mike and Jim ... and it was the same. Especially for the short description. It was the same for all of them. So if you looked at the feed, that description was the same, was the same one. And I'm like, oh man, I need to get that guest name. Very first thing, if that's up there. We have boom. So-and-so is here this week to talk about boom. Get those out in the first couple sentences.
Yeah. You really want to grab them. And then while I was there, again, podcasters with an S, I don't know what it is with these different, because it's, podcasts with an S, podcastsconnect.apple.com, podcastsmanager.google.com, and then with Spotify, podcasters.spotify.com. They have this one about how to get your podcast featured on Spotify, and they have all these submission guidelines and yada, yada, yada. And then they're saying that one of the things you can do is they have a bunch of apparently pre-made, because it's kind of interesting. They're like, here's how you submit. Oh, by the way, we're not going to contact you if you get added, probably. And they said, but you can look for your show in these pre-made kind of lists. So that's, to me, when I saw that, I was like, oh, that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to drive traffic to these lists. Yes, they're telling you how to get, featured, but I was like, I think it's interesting that it's like, oh, and here's the call to action. Look at these lists that are pre-made. And I was like, interesting. But if you, Spotify for podcasters is where you go to log in, and that it's like I'm logged in now, so there's my dashboard, and it'll show you all the fun-filled stuff and fun-filled stats that you can play with. The thing I think it's great, and I was thinking about almost removing Spotify from my website. I don't think it really would make a difference, but just have Apple and Google podcasts. That's it. Here's iOS, here's Android, because Google gives you keywords. Like, here's what people search to find your show. Now, Spotify also shows you how far people listen. So does Google Podcasts, and so does Apple. The one I always throw in just because they're big is Amazon. and Amazon is building something in the back end, like a portal that I'm sure will have an extra S in it. But I really, when I saw that and again, it's podcasts with an S, manager.google.com, and I get almost no downloads on Google Podcasts, which is a bummer because I still remember when they're like, we're going to make this the #1 app and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, what happened to that Google comeback? What did I say?
I do get 20 or 30 out there, but it's
Yeah.
far and above it's Apple, for the
Yeah.
most part. Which I think is true of older shows because we pushed so hard for Apple back then
and still do.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Again, going back to the Buzzcast, because they were talking about the Tom Webster, which is funny because it really sounds profitable survey, but it was done by Tom Webster about, the creators. And they were saying how they thought like me, where it's like, I'm not sure how accurate that is. Because when I go to Podcast Movement, it's 50-50 women and their survey showed different. And they said, look, numbers can always, be tilted one way or another. And they said for the longest time, Buzzsprout customers always skewed heavy Spotify. And their thoughts on this were, hey, new podcasters aren't 40 anymore, right? So when we started back in the day, there was no Spotify when we started. Spotify doesn't make you jump through hoops to get added, right? It's in fact, most apps you can go in and say, add this to Spotify and you're done. And then you claim the show in that. And so they're like, yeah, our numbers were skewed because Spotify made it easier to, submit your show to be liked. And new podcasters were like, I'll do the Apple thing later because I've got to set that up and then I've got to put in a credit card number, even though it's free and things like that. So, which by the way, Apple is going to be probably by the end of the year, you'll be able to go into and obviously all of us who already have a podcast have done this, but new podcasters will be able to do the whole, hey, add me to Apple kind of thing. And you won't have to jump through so many hoops. So let's see. Somebody has an Anchor question. When Anchor tells me the number of plays per episode, do they mean only on Anchor? No, in theory. Now, here's the thing. Keep in mind that with Anchor, I believe, this has not been I've heard multiple people say this, and my Anchor account is so old I didn't have to do this, but I hear that new podcasts on Anchor now, you have to ask for an RSS feed because they don't give them out. They want you to just be on Spotify. Once you get your RSS feed, they used to submit your show to all the apps automatically. That's one of the things that really made me mad because they didn't mention that, oh, by the way, you just lost control of some of your show. So now when you get the RSS feed that you had to ask for, you can submit your show to all the directories manually, which is not hard for the record. So consequently, if you've submitted your show to all the directories and you have it on your website, etc., yeah, those downloads in Anchor are a download is a download. And being that they are IAB certified, that means somebody listened to at least a minute or they downloaded your show. So Anchor's always been weird. And I forgot Anchor started off, they were going to be the audio Twitter. Like it was really short snippets. They were almost kind of clubhousey. Yes, Anchor, Coach Dave said, is the hand grenade that can blow up any Dave Jackson show. Yeah, I'm trying to be kind. So, and especially now that you might want to Google your show and make sure that somebody hasn't accidentally made a duplicate of your show and is putting ads against it, because they'll make it really easy to create a podcast on Anchor, but they're not going to protect you once it's up there. Yeah. So, Coach Dave is on fire today. Deep fake audio will be made from our podcast voices in the future. Yep. They'll be able to listen. They'll run my voice through. It's already here. In Descript, I can read a bunch of stuff and then have Descript say things that I didn't say. 60 Minutes did a great thing on this where they took the correspondent, whose name I can't remember, but I'm going to say a middle-aged black dude, and they took him and erased his beard, made him 20 years younger, and then had him say things that he never said. And it was really believable. It was one notch above video game. Like, it was like, okay, if you knew to look for it, you'd go, yeah, that's fake. But it was like, ooh. And that's when I was like, that whole thing, like, let's go to the tape, isn't going to mean what it used to be in the past. So that'll be fun to watch. Let me see what else we have here. From Aaron Sefchik. And for the record, if anybody wonders why I keep doing this, on the Rodecaster 2, if I tap on the numbers, so right now we've been going an hour and 15 minutes, it puts a marker in there. So I will be easier for me to make time stamps and such. So Aaron asked, clearly this is not the group, so this was a podcast group, to be asking, but in your opinion, why do businesses have a hard time in seeing the obvious value in podcasting for their business? So DR was talking about how, I think it was DR, right, that says she does branded shows. Not sure if people are stuck in a traditional media marketing, don't understand the medium or what. Every business I approach stammers, makes something up about budgeting, even though podcasting is the cheapest of all marketing by far, or doesn't follow through. I don't get it. I would think podcasting for small businesses and big would be a no-brainer, especially when presented with the vast list of benefits of a podcast can bring. And I guess I guess in this course, he's kind of preaching to the choir.
I have a couple problems with what's actually said there.
All right.
One, it's not the cheapest. Like they're...
Oh, I don't know about that.
Well, I mean, it's cheap to do. Is it cheap to do right?
Well, and if you're paying somebody, that's true too.
Yeah, I mean, there's humans involved. I have an editor who spends 6 hours editing, the transcripts to make them right for what we do for ADA perspective. Well, that's 6 hours. It's not cheap. You have a video editor that takes a half an hour, 45 minutes, whatever. Let's just call it an hour. My time, it's not cheap. So we sometimes think because you can get free hosting and whatever, that this stuff is all free. It's not free. And for a lot of small businesses, what they do is not interesting. And for a lot of small businesses, they don't have the talent to do the podcast. And just because you're a podcast host doesn't mean you can just jump in and all of a sudden start a podcast for them that's going to be good or accepted or valuable from day one. I mean, shoot, I think we spent a couple years validating our podcast to Gallup to get them where we wanted them, right? I think there's this idea that, oh, I could just start a podcast and it's going to be awesome and it's going to have tremendous value. Maybe not. In the very beginning, it could suck pretty bad, and you could have the wrong host. Let me give an example. And I think I know Rob Greenlee pretty well, and I don't want to, and I'm not trying to poop on anybody's parade here, but when he was at Spreaker, they did about 8 versions of this Spreaker podcast that eventually landed on Rob, just being Rob, but they brought in a host for a while. I think Alec Exum was on there for a while. It drove me crazy. Yeah. And he's supposed to. He's that kind of guy, right? But they even went through some iterations to kind of figure some stuff out. I don't think small businesses or even medium-sized businesses always have the foresight or the patience to wait through those kinds of things. Like, hey, maybe for the first year, this thing's not going to turn a profit. I think sometimes as host providers, though, we want to say, oh, yeah, this is going to be dynamite right out of the gate.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah, I agree, my friend.
So anyways,
I had somebody, because I have podcast consultants at the School of Podcasting, which is always kind of interesting. And he said, look, I've done this podcast for a church, and, they're getting 23 downloads an episode. He's like, but I need to make a report. Like, what do you put on the report? And I'm like, well, you put how many downloads they got, how many countries they're in, if you want to throw in what apps people are using. I said, remember, it's numbers. So if they got 2 last week and 4 this week, you've helped them grow their show by X amount of percent. Yeah. I said, numbers can do anything. I said, but for me, it's always about setting exactly what you said. You got to set expectations, because just because you put it, if I build it, they will come has been the biggest lie about podcasting and really anything, right? I can go grab a guitar and sing on the corner. Nobody's coming. I got to go tell people I'm on the corner. Come listen. And so,
and even then, when you say that, if you're not saying it to the right audience, this is where
right.
paying for marketing comes in. We spend a lot of money on the Gallup side of things. We spend a lot of people directing people to our sites. And I think in the podcast world, we just think, oh yeah, if I just talk, people will listen. No, not anymore. No, you're going to have to do some serious marketing. So is it cheaper that this is, coming full circle? I don't think it is, Dave. To do and to do right.
Yeah, because I always think, well, it's $30-$50 a month, maybe, if you throw in an email list and things like that. But you're right, the time, because you're either going to pay in time to make good content or money to pay somebody to spend their time on it. So yeah, that's a good point. Mystic Max says it seems like everybody's worried about numbers. Shouldn't the message be more important? Do I have the right thing here? I agree. Especially that the message has to be first if you want the numbers, kind of going back to what Jim just said, but it takes a while to figure out what your audience wants and what they need and delivering it in a fun and entertaining fashion and all that other stuff. But so many people do. The interesting thing now working at Libsyn that we have Glow. And it's one of those things where with Glow, you're like, hey, you don't need 5,000 listeners to get ads. You can monetize your podcast. And I'm kind of like hinting at those guys. I'm like, we need to put an asterisk there. Because if you're getting, and I'm not making this up, 9 downloads an episode, can you monetize that? Sure. But in my travels, I've seen maybe 3%. So 3% of 9 isn't even a person. Like you have 0.3, I'm like, So again, I want to set expectations for people so that when they go through whoever it is, Supercast, Glow, Patreon, I'm like, just putting it up there isn't going to be that. So, and
Dave, the other thing, just real quick, the other thing in the corporate space where we run into trouble, if you're trying to sell podcasts to the corporate side of things, and if your pitch is this is a cheap way of doing marketing, you will never be able to get any money for your podcast, including them paying you to do this ever. You can't lead. Don't lead with this is the cheapest form of marketing, because you want to set the expectation that it's like any other form of marketing. It takes money to make money. And so you need to just set that expectation, like you're saying, set that expectation clear from the very beginning so that they set aside some budget to not only pay you, but to pay for some marketing, to pay for some equipment, to pay for some things. Right.
Yeah. Mystic Max says, in this case, it's a ministry podcast. Ministry podcasts, it's one of those things where in the early days, you're like, oh, we can take our sermons and put them out. But the sermons sound like it was recorded in a cave. Yeah. And to me, I'm just like, when I hear them, it's somebody talking to a group of people where if they took that same thing, got somewhere near a microphone that wasn't in a giant room with 30 feet ceilings, to where it sounded better and talked to one person instead of a group. And I don't know, just to me, I don't think sermons are the transcripts of podcasting. It's better than nothing, but in the end, like, I'd
almost have the pastor redo the sermon same day, but with no audience and speaking with good equipment, or taking the material they had and fashioning it in a way that would work better for the podcast. Like how good that it's already there. All the prep is there. There's some dynamics live that don't always translate to the recorded bit.
Yeah.
Have them do it again and add some things to it. Have them add some things to it, or her, that they don't get for the live version. Now all of a sudden you start going, oh, I came, but there's something different. You want to push your numbers up a little bit, provide some extra value that didn't exist on Sunday morning.
Yeah. In terms of businesses
or Saturday night, whatever.
Yeah. John Buchanan says, I find that businesses that are really passionate about their service or product make a better podcast. Yep, I agree with that. If they're mailing it in, exactly what Jim said, it's just like, okay, today we're going to talk about blah, blah, blah. And then I love this quote from the real Brian that John shares. He says, it can be fast, cheap, or good, but you can only have two, which is why I've had two stoves in my kitchen for the better part of a year, because it will be installed great. I'm not paying hardly any money for it, but fast it is not. It's been there for
Hey, wait a minute. Chinese food, fast, good, and cheap.
Yeah.
It meets all those American Chinese food, I should say.
Yeah.
So not true for everything.
Tom Taylor says most churches already live stream services and then record right to YouTube. Yep.
Yeah.
It's which again is great. I know we get about 30% of my audience for my church is watching live now on Zoom, and it's horrible audio. We have to keep telling people, get in front of a mic. The people online can't hear you. And then Coach Dave says sermons can be deeply personal and a very intimate connection using the podcast medium. Those who are interested are called flock for a reason, right? They flock to you. Exactly, where two or more are gathered. Yeah. So it's and wait a minute. He's saying, wait, you found the new one.
I found the one that doesn't apply to Chinese food. So that's true for everything except Chinese food.
Chinese food. Yeah. But Jim, what is coming up on The Average Guy? Do we have another guest coming up, or what's going to be the deal?
Oh yeah, no. We're in fact. So I already talked about what we did this week. Deep Sentinel, Dave from Deep Sentinel is in, but next week Ed Sullivan is joining me. So Ed, we all know Ed. We talk about him, Sonic Cupcake. Ed's coming on to talk about fitness gear and in biking and Garmin.
Ooh.
He's a big cyclist. So you might want to, if you haven't, come out Thursday night, 8 p.m. Central, and it's kind of like this, only Dave Jackson isn't there. And I know that's 90% of the reason you maybe.
So it's good, is what you're saying.
Probably 95% of the reason you're here is Dave Jackson. But come out and join us on Thursday night. Ed Sullivan will be joining us.
Thursday at 8 at theaverageguy.tv
TV/live.
There we go. Awesome. On the School of Podcasting, a little bit of what Jim said today. I was like, ooh, Jim's been reading my mind. And that is what podcasters can learn from the movie industry. Because if you look at how movies are made and how they kind of shape what's going to work and what's going to not, and the fact that Top Gun took 30 years to make, all sorts of fun little things that I go, maybe podcasters should think a little bit like that, maybe. So that will be coming up on Monday's show. And also, we always want to thank the chat room. 24 people still hanging out here with us. We appreciate that. We are here every Saturday at AskThePodcastCoach.com/live. Thanks to Dan over at BasedOnATrueStoryPodcast.com. Thanks to Mark at PodcastBranding.co and James at the Dog Podcast Network. And I still have a quarter of a pie. This podcast is part of the Power of Podcasting Network. Find it at powerofpodcasting.com. So thanks so much, everybody. Stick around. We'll see you next week with another episode of Ask the Podcast Coach.